So you see, in a way, if we're really being honest and genuine about this, there is some kind of parallel. Now, you see, this is the kind of tricky part, and the bit that I like the least, or I guess just really hate, because even trying to kind of segue into this, even trying to just open up this discussion, the amount of ridicule and mockery that people like me get for just trying to open up the discussion is just astonishing, really. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast in this second episode of the series so far, where it's still pretty early days here and everything is still being planned out. I've got a bunch of episodes in the pipeline coming up for you. Hopefully, those will come sooner rather than later. And what's more interesting is that I'll have guests on as well. So it will involve more than just me, right? If you get tired and bored of just listening to me here. Anyways, let me just start off by saying, firstly, a huge thank you to all of you who've showed your support and listened to my first episode. And again, if you're listening now, thank you so much for coming back and continuing to support me and this podcast series. So, as I promised in the first episode, I said that I would come up with a name for the series. And so I shall deliver on that promise right now. If you haven't noticed already, it's called Unmuzzled. And I think it's pretty obvious why I went with that, especially if you've listened to both the first episode and the intro video that I made, which is up on my other YouTube channel, Hazween 23. And I decided not to just put up the podcast there, since I felt like I should just dedicate one whole channel for this series, right? So yeah, back to the name of the series, Unmuzzled. I think it is really apt for a couple of reasons. The reason for me starting this series, and B, the kind of platform that I wish and intend for it to be, and that it's supposed to provide, not only for my benefit, but hopefully for the benefit of all my listeners. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the series in a nutshell. Now, if you're listening to this, you're most definitely listening to it on my new YouTube channel, Unmuzzled, of course. And so this is a change from the previous SoundCloud channel that I had set and announced for this podcast, where I had my first episode up initially. So I had to move over to YouTube because I was basically running out of the free minutes allocated to just my basic and free SoundCloud account. Using the basic account, you're only given 3 hours worth of recording minutes that you can upload onto your account. So yeah, I don't subscribe or pay for the premium account, the unlimited account that they have. And in order to keep costs down, or in my case to zero, since I don't want to really commit financially to anything just yet, I decided that the best solution was to obviously move it to a free platform, or a free content sharing platform, just like YouTube is. I'll probably consider moving back to SoundCloud or be on some other similar podcast streaming service platform when, number one, my finances allow for me to do so. Yeah, and also when I think it's best to invest in the monthly fees for a more premium account. If you ask me as a matter of preference, of course, I'd much rather stay on a platform like SoundCloud, where it is especially geared for podcasts, right? For streaming audio, rather than having your podcast on a video sharing platform like YouTube is. And then you have both the video and the visual and the audio element to it, which I think kind of takes away from the experience, or at least what I learned from my journalism training days, or at least what I learned to appreciate, was that with listening, and especially in the kind of conventional radio broadcast sense, it is such a passive activity, which means that you can multitask. You can do a bunch of different things while listening to something on the radio. And you can do all that and still be able to take in and absorb the information that's being broadcast. And I think that is pretty much the underrated side to listening to audio podcasts and platforms that offer those services. Anyway, that's just a little bit on why I have decided to move to YouTube. It's more so a financial decision or lack thereof, and certainly not a strategic one, at least as far as this podcast is concerned. Anyway, before I get too carried away with that, I guess I better start moving on with the more pressing agenda at hand, which is the second episode of this podcast. So in staying true to the vision and mission that I've set for this podcast series, I've decided to pick on another highly relevant, I would say, and a very timely topic, which is on bodily autonomy, which is a notion and a topic that we kind of come across every now and again, and it gets brought up from time to time. But I just don't think, honestly, I don't think that there's ever been a better time and a more necessary time to bring this up and to keep repeating it, especially with what's going on with the kind of concerted efforts to curtail and to censor free and open discussion around it, you know, especially if what you have to say is against the more mainstream narrative, of the or the approved popular opinion. So yeah, this second episode is going to be all about bodily autonomy. So before doing this recording, I obviously did a bit of research, and I did a little bit of Googling. So what I did first was just to Google bodily autonomy definition. Okay. And the first thing that came up on Google was this UN article, right? It's called, the title is Bodily Autonomy, Busting 7 Myths That Undermine Individual Rights and Freedom. So it's by the UN. It's from the UN, specifically the United Nations Population Fund, okay, which is an agency under the UN, and it's fairly recent. It was published back in April this year, so a lot of it is, I guess, they deem still contemporary and relevant to the discourse, on bodily autonomy. Now, the first thing that you see right off the bat, just from reading the lead paragraph here, is the mentioning of women, right? The first sentence there, nearly half of all women are denied their bodily autonomy. So immediately you get the idea that the discussion surrounding bodily autonomy is somewhat very focused and centered around women's rights. And I think that's really not anything that comes as a surprise, especially looking at the progress that we've seen over the past century, ever since you can go all the way back to the first wave of feminism, to the likes of the suffragette movement, to the likes of Susan B. Anthony and Harriet Tubman, okay, for when women were fighting for their rights to vote, for emancipation from slavery, that sort of thing, to now more sort of in the more contemporary liberal feminist second wave feminism movement, right, where the discourse has grown larger. There's a lot of things added to that discussion. Whether or not that's a good or bad thing, I think right now I'm not really trying to argue that, but I'm just kind of stating the evolution of it. So it started off as something, especially in the earlier days, it was more to do with very important, very basic civil rights, right? The right to vote, the right to be a free citizen and not a second-class citizen and not a slave, definitely, right? To be able to free yourselves from being segregated, during the segregation era and that sort of thing. So there was a time when that was of the most importance. That was very pertinent. Of course, when you think about in comparison to, I'm not trying to discount the movement now or trying to say that it's less important now, but in comparison, you would say, and I guess most of us would all agree that those rights are definitely very, very basic ones and worth, fighting for, which is why the first wave of feminism really, marked a huge milestone in the progressive movement, in the progressive liberal movement. So right now, it seems that as we've progressed over the decades, this movement has been kind of directed more towards reproductive rights. Okay, so it's very common to tie in bodily autonomy to female reproductive rights. At least, just from the surface of just reading this UN article here, that's the picture that you can sense. That's the discussion that's surrounding it. Okay, and I'll continue to sort of just read through the first few paragraphs here. So nearly half of all the women are denied their bodily autonomy, according to data from 57 countries. The UNFPA's flagship report announced today. So the 2021 State of World Population Report, titled My Body is My Own, marks the first time a United Nations report focuses on the power and agency of individuals to make choices about their bodies without fear, violence, or coercion. So right here, just from reading this intro, it doesn't quite set the criteria of what stands legally when it comes to the concept of bodily autonomy. On the surface, and we'll get into the operative definition of what bodily autonomy is. I guess on the surface, it just means that you reserve and that you have the right to reserve your self-sovereignty, that no one can tell you what to do with your body, whether that's a medical procedure, or whether it's part of a cultural practice, or whatever it is. Really, no one has the right to tell you what to do with your body. Okay, now moving on to the second paragraph of this article, the report examines data on women's decision-making power and on laws supportive of sexual and reproductive health. So right now, it's already coming up here, the keywords reproductive health and rights. Tragically, only 55% of women have bodily autonomy, according to measurements of their ability to make their own decisions on issues relating to healthcare, contraception, and whether to have sex. So already now, it's kind of being narrowed down to reproductive health, and within, kind of under that umbrella, it really kind of states, it really tries to put the emphasis on healthcare, contraception, and being sexual, or whether to have sex. So moving on, the report also highlights the legal, economic, and social barriers to securing bodily autonomy for all. 20 countries or territories, for example, have marry your rapist, laws that allow perpetrators to escape punishment if they marry their victims, codifying the denial of autonomy experienced by survivors of rape. But some of the most persistent barriers to bodily autonomy involve stereotypes, assumptions, and misconceptions about bodily autonomy and the rights of women and girls. So it kind of goes on a little bit on that. Before then, it goes on to listing what the myths are. So the whole point of this article is to kind of bust the 7 myths on bodily autonomy and why we must abandon these misconceptions once and for all. So the first one is bodily autonomy is a Western concept. Okay. I'm not going to read all of them out to you, or at least the explanation for each of the points. I'll just kind of read out to you what those myths are. So number 1, bodily autonomy is a Western concept. Number 2, there is no right to bodily autonomy. 3, bodily autonomy represents radical individualism. It undermines group decision making. 4, it says that one person's bodily autonomy could end up undermining the autonomy of others. 5, some groups of people are not entitled to bodily autonomy. 5, 6 was 6. Bodily autonomy undermines traditions and religions, and 7, bodily autonomy is just another women's issue. So I guess the seventh one here kind of rounds up the discussion on it being a women's issue, by saying, in a way, it's sort of it's I wouldn't say it's contradictory, but it is kind of ironic why this is listed as a myth when you know for a fact that as the feminism movement progressed over the years, this is more and more becoming a pretty much a women's reproductive rights issue. Yeah, and then you kind of tie it back to bodily autonomy. But anyways, I'm not here to say whether the article is wrong or right. I'm just here to kind of state the obvious. And as I said, I did my research. I Googled bodily autonomy definition, and this was the first article that came up. So, if you want to take a look at the article, you want to see and read for yourself in detail, please go ahead. And as I said, it's still pretty recent. It's still very new. So I'm guessing that they also see this as something hugely relevant. Yeah, it's still very contemporary given the kind of discourse where we are at in terms of bodily autonomy. So on to the actual definition of what bodily autonomy is. Now, I did a little bit of more searching and Googling, and I came across this other article, which is also, I guess, recent, but not as recent as the UN article. This was back from last year, from December. And it's an article from or by The Persecuted, which I'm guessing is a legal group or legal aid group, specifically for fighting for women's rights. And the title of the article is "What is Bodily Autonomy?" Okay, and after the intro, it goes on to the definition here. Okay. And it is basically from a philosopher, an American philosopher, a professor of law and ethics, called Martha Nussbaum. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. So she has written a few books. She's published a few papers and books. And one of her, I guess, well-known ones is 10 Principal Capabilities Approach, that is obviously on bodily autonomy. And on the basis of her own words and thoughts, she defines bodily autonomy as the state of free movement that the individual enjoys in a manner of being from one place to another, okay, by being in conformity with ease and security against the prevalent threats of violence and sexual assault, and most importantly, being able to have a grasp on a handful of opportunities that will provide the individual both an optimal level of sexual satisfaction, okay, and a choice of matters in terms of reproduction. So, I mean, so far, right now, the most, I guess, the most popular searches that will come up, or hits on Google that will come up on bodily autonomy, are all kind of tied back to feminism and to women's reproductive rights. And however the UN article tries to kind of paint it as, it's a misconception, or that it's a myth, that it's just a women's rights issue. Again, I don't think for me, that's a bit of a misrepresentation of what people are actually saying, like it's a straw man of the actual argument. But yeah, I think that it's so obvious. Okay, you don't really have to try that hard to kind of, if you do just a simple search on Google, you will keep getting a lot of articles discussing women's rights as part of what bodily autonomy is. Okay, and as I said, it's hugely centered around women's reproductive rights. I'm not here, again, I'm not here to discuss whether or not that is a good or bad thing, but that's just the evolution of the liberal, the progressive liberal feminism movement. We've gone from the first wave of feminism to the second wave where we are right now. Okay, so yes, the concept of bodily autonomy is primarily associated with manifestation of free will and self-sovereignty, and is naturally championed by the liberalization movement, the progressive liberal movement, right, by the feminists, talked about and pioneered by many liberals, progressives, and feminists of the like. Yeah. And obviously, from just the two examples we've seen, it's mainly centered around women's reproductive rights. So I guess to gather more insight to the discussion on bodily autonomy and to have more of a context on how it all began, you really have to go to its roots and origins, to a time when this discussion on bodily autonomy had to be had, and there was something that had to be done about it. So in order to do that, you have to go all the way back to the Second World War, around about the time when, or at least at the end of the Second World War, around about the time when the Nazis lost and the Nuremberg Trials happened, right? Because this was essentially what was the precedent for what we now know as the Geneva Convention, or basically the provision, the UN provision on what it means to preserve and to champion basic human rights. Okay, the international law, the universal law that we all agree upon, is predicated on what was achieved through these Nuremberg trials. So it set the precedent in that basically, if you really have no idea what I'm talking about here and what the Nuremberg trials are, okay, so we go all the way back to the Second World War, when, you know, Hitler was in charge, or at least at the time before Germany lost and Hitler was in charge and the Nazis were ruling Germany. They committed a lot of crimes against humanity, namely the Holocaust, right, which was the prosecution and persecution of Jewish people. So in the end, they ended up mass killing around, I think it was 4 to 6 million Jews in total. Okay, so even at this time, even at the time when historically the world before that, you know, even during the Second World War itself, where politically the world was so polarized, especially in terms of the influence and power that was at stake and would have been gained from winning the war. You know, the world then was nowhere near to coming to more liberal, to more peaceful dialogue means of resolving conflict. Then, you know, if two nations were at odds with each other, especially two powerful nations, the only way to resolve the conflict was through war, through being at war with each other and going to war. So the fact that the Nuremberg trials came out from this period, I think says a lot, and especially at this time when, you know, there were a lot of alliances being formed, especially you kind of had the balance of power at play. And when you had the kind of alliances, the Triple Alliance in particular, the US, the UK, and even the Soviet Union, right, kind of banding together and wanting to really address this issue of preserving human rights, I think really says something about this time and says something about the importance of having a precedence such as this and at this magnitude. Of course, you know, there's a lot of politics at play. You know, the whole motivation behind it was obviously to bring down a regime to deal with a very discernible threat politically, especially for the continental powers. But you just can't deny the fact that this whole thing led to the Nuremberg trials, which then solidified and brought about the notion of recognizing and acknowledging something that's supposed to be an axiom anyways, which is part of our innate, you know, natural laws to respect one another, to preserve the sanctity and welfare and individual, you know, sovereignty over your own bodies, right? to recognize it as international law. Yeah, the Nuremberg Trials formed the basis. It was the foundation for what we know as the Geneva Convention today. It's an international law that is upheld by many sovereign nations, particularly the ones that abide by agreed to UN conventions, because that's where the convention lies in. It's part of the UN. It's part of the formation of the UN. One of the first ones. So that is why I like to kind of bring everyone back to that, to the starting point of the discussion on bodily autonomy, because it does remind you of the thing that set precedence to this, that made it an issue, important enough that it is something that we have to keep fighting for. Okay, even though, as I mentioned earlier, that this is supposed to be an innate natural law, that it is supposed to be universally agreed upon, moral code and principle that we all should just respect our own rights to our own bodily autonomy and our self-sovereignty. The fact that something as bad as the Holocaust, okay, and all the atrocities committed by the Nazis brought about this change, I think really does drive the point home when it comes to how we're really supposed to look at bodily autonomy. Sorry about that. I keep hitting the mic every now and again. So yeah, you've probably heard a few of those, right? So yeah, it really does drive the point home when we, really, if we're really being honest about the depth of the discussion on bodily autonomy. So I mean, I get now that it is not a popular thing, right, to say otherwise. To say what I just said, right? To say that it should be more than just women's reproductive rights, or that it shouldn't just be centered around women's reproductive rights. I feel that we do a disservice, when we just continue to just focus and delve into that, while in a way we continue to be ignorant or dismissive of other more pressing things, especially with what's happening right now. So I guess you all kind of were anticipating for this to come. Okay, I guess you already saw this coming, where I'm trying to bring this point onto. So following that, okay, now that you've got a little bit of insight and context to this discussion on bodily autonomy, at least in terms of my perspective, you see, this is why I want to have this platform, I want to have this podcast run, because I just want to be honest and open and transparent with you. I opened it up with that, with bodily autonomy, and I gave you reason as to why we have to go all the way back if we're really being honest and genuine about this discussion and the arguments that we make around this. We have to go all the way back to how it started, and now you can see where it's going, and I guess in a way where you can see where the narrative is being controlled, or that there is a very concerted effort to push for one narrative rather than be truly truthful and honest about the whole thing historically and what's happened leading up to where we are now. So part of, as I said, part of the atrocities committed against the Jewish people under the Nazis was, of course, they were put into concentration camps. The more kind of notorious ones were the gas chambers. Most of them were gassed to death in these concentration camps that they were put in. And I guess that's more of the common one that we hear about, being talked about mostly. But equally as much, what was also happening was they were being subject to medical experiments. And obviously these medical experiments, which involved medical procedures and interventions, were conducted on them against their will. Okay? So you see, in a way, if we're really being honest and genuine about this, there is some kind of parallel. Now, you see, this is the kind of tricky part, and the bit that I like the least or I guess just really hate. Because even trying to kind of segue into this, even trying to just open up this discussion, the amount of ridicule and mockery that people like me get for just trying to open up the discussion is just astonishing, really. You would think as we become more progressive, that societies have become more civilized and we all are very open to new ideas and new ways of thinking about things, that they'll be more tolerant, or at least, more willing to kind of have an exchange, a peaceful and a civil one at that, right? And be able to just hear one another out. But just the mere fact, and you really can't deny this, the mere fact of just kind of bringing up the Nuremberg Trials and speaking about it in tandem, or I guess parallel to with the vaccine mandates that's happening now, okay, gets you ridiculed, and people are just throwing attacks and insults at you, with really no cogent and substantial argument, needless to say. And then it also gets you censored. The fact checkers will come after you and start flagging your posts as misleading, or that it's missing some context of some sort, when that has been proven to not been the case most times that it's happened. Okay, they just pretend that they are the arbiters of truth, and they come on with their so-called fact checks and claim that you are saying something that is not true, is misleading, when in fact it's really something that they don't like to be posted. They don't like people talking about. So yeah, you, as a result, you get flagged, and you get labeled as being, as spreading misinformation, or that you are purposely trying to spread categorically false, information. And from there on, you kind of get shadow banned. And that's when the algorithms come out to play. And ultimately, that just either, you end up not being seen by other people, by your followers, or you ultimately get a permanent ban if you kind of keep on doing it, right? If you keep on saying stuff that isn't, not that it's necessarily untrue, because as I said, in most cases that has proven not to be the case, but it's just that it goes against the mainstream narrative. I mean, you have to question, especially, for anyone who is capable of thinking as an intelligent human being, as a decent, intelligent human being who's rational and who has a brain. You cannot even just for a second pretend that these people are even, trying to not to pretend that this is what they're really doing. When you see the fact checkers come on and slapping you with all these fact checks, you look at who these fact checkers are. It is the media's own. These are people. The fact checkers are MSM. Okay, they are working hand in hand with the social media platforms, with the social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, and all of that. Okay, so they have their own people fact checking. All right, your post, which is supposed to be on a social media platform that is only just a platform. All right, they claim themselves as just a platform for free speech, for exchange of ideas, not a publisher, because especially in the US, where most of these companies are from, there are different legalities around that. If you are a newspaper or a publisher legally, okay, that's where most of all the mainstream media kind of fall under. Then you are subject to different laws. Yeah, as a publisher, you are kind of more prone to the legal scrutinies, especially when it comes to libel or defamation. Okay, because as a publisher, you curate the information that you publish. Right, these people who run the newspapers, who broadcast the news on the TV channels, radio channels, and internet, what have you, they have gatekeepers at the top. Yeah, the editors determine what gets published, and I guess in a way they determine what they deem as true or truthful. Whereas with social media platforms, they don't fall under the category of publisher. They claim themselves to be a free platform for the sharing of ideas, exchange of ideas, and just having an open space for people to express themselves. But it is apparently not the case anymore. It is increasingly becoming or unbecoming of that concept of being an open and free social platform. Because now you've got the fact checkers coming on and self-proclaiming themselves as the arbiter of truth. I mean, what else would you call that? You know, if it's supposed to be a place where people can just freely exchange their ideas, then let it be that. Let it remain that way, and not have these fact checkers, these fact police, I guess, come over and tell you what's true or not, and even worse, to censor what they deem to be true or not. So that is the beef that I have with these social media giants, and it's so upsetting and frustrating because in some ways you still kind of rely on them to be able to engage with people, especially for someone like me who enjoys having open and civil discussions and dialogues with people, just random people, you know, with the public. So you rely so much on these social media services, but then you're also at the behest, you know, of their kind of mercy, and they get to decide whether what you say is okay or not, is approved or not by their standards. So it's, you know, it's the epitome of hypocrisy. Anyways, so that is pretty much the origins of where this idea of bodily autonomy started off with. So, you know, we go all the way back to a time where it wasn't even thought of. It was pretty much unthinkable then to even be addressing it as a legal issue, and of course to further champion these rights, to further make sure that this is entrenched and a part of universal law, international law today. So if you happen to be on the side that thinks it's extreme, that it's too much for me to draw these parallels, to start having the discussion on saying, you know, where we are headed to with these mandated, you know, vaccinations, is reminiscent of something that the world has seen, and wishes, at least I hope that everyone else thinks the same too, wishes that we all never have to see it again. And even worse, and God forbid, never have to experience it for ourselves. It's so sad that this is something that had already happened. It happened in the past, but we are not learning from it. We're supposed to learn from what's happened in history. But it is so sad where things are at here with, you know, the current status of humanity, or lack of it, I would say. A lot of you still remain ignorant. If not, even if you kind of to some extent see where this is possibly headed, you keep silent. You wish to not say much on the matter because you know of the retribution that will, you know, come as a result of it. That basically the powers that be, the people who control the narrative and the media, will come after you, and you don't want that because it's inconvenient. Yes, I admit it's inconvenient. It was inconvenient for me to speak as transparently about how I feel about the vaccines, about how I felt about the lockdowns and all that. I had a viral video, you know, 20-second viral video, which didn't even make any factual claims. Yeah, all it was just 3 points that I wanted to really, you know, tell people that to just start thinking. If you can't question it, it's not science. To end the lockdowns, and that the jabs be voluntary, that it should not be mandated. But the internet just lost their minds. People lost their minds over just a request. It was just a request. I wasn't even making any factual claims, or making, a substantial argument about anything against or for anything. So that's where we are at in terms of a collective, in terms of being rational human beings. And there is a complete disconnect between those two things I've just mentioned, rational and human beings. So yeah, that's sadly where we are at right now. Now, this then, the point of having this discussion on bodily autonomy is to ultimately kind of go down onto the more philosophical route, right? So I started with bodily autonomy, discuss where it is now, where the contemporary discussion on it is at the moment, and where it has been, okay, and what's driving it, to what was the origins of this notion of bodily autonomy. What pushed this concept out? What materialized it? And we talked about the Nuremberg Trials. Okay, what happened under Nazi Germany? So now we move on to the more kind of philosophical discussion around it, right? So we now know that history has shown us these medical interventions. Whether or not you want to call these vaccines medical interventions, that's your prerogative. But staying true to the idea of bodily autonomy and how it's been defined, you know, especially by the UN and other prominent scholars, it's all about preserving the bodily autonomy of oneself. To have self-sovereignty, to have control over your body, of what you decide, what you want to put in or do to your body. Okay, so then obviously this becomes a huge philosophical argument, and it's important where you stand on this. And I think that really does define your character. So the argument, the people who are pushing for this mandate, they say, you should take it. Yeah, obviously everyone should take it. I'm not even trying to argue whether you should or you should not take it, because obviously, as someone who believes in freedom, in self-sovereignty, that's entirely up to you. It's a matter of choice. So if you want to go and get the jab, that's fine by me. Do that, as long as you somewhat, I guess, have some informed consent, although I think that is completely absent now, especially given the circumstances that we're in. So yes, if you feel like you went and got the jab, and you did that because you felt that it was right for you, for your health, okay, you did it for so-called right reasons, I'm all for that. Yes, because I believe in your choice, in your freedom to choose. But to say that then everyone should have it, and that in order to materialize, in order to make that happen, you should mandate the vaccinations. Now that's where we dangerously fall into known territory and into the nightmares of the past, because this argument for this mandate is because, and it is being shouted out. It's being shouted and chanted out by people on social media, by the likes of just you and me, by regular people, and worse even by public figures, by politicians, by doctors, the people who actually have authority. They are all chanting the same thing: do it for the greater good. You see, this is when I have to really say something, because this goes completely against everything that I believe in. Okay. And the fact that it does have an impact on me, okay, and on my future, it is highly relevant of me to address this issue. So what is this idea? What is this notion for the greater good? Okay, it is obviously a very dangerous philosophy to have, because it kind of goes down this fallacy of going down the slippery slope. Okay, while the slippery slope, the slippery slope is a fallacy in itself, okay? But I feel that by using this as an argument, to propose mandates, to support and substantiate mandates that they are indeed for the greater good, is going to lead us down to a path to hell. You see, this is biblical quote, right? And I'm sure you hear this all the time. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And funnily enough, I'm actually reminded of the Madonna song, 4 Minutes, I think it's called, where there's a line in the song, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Kind of goes something like that. So yeah, kind of instantly, every time I think of the line, it just instantly brings me back to the Madonna song. But in a way, that song kind of really illustrates the point. Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That people, when they say they do something because it is out of necessity for everyone's benefit, not for their own, but everyone's benefit, that it's supposed to guarantee collective security, okay, for everyone. How does that guarantee, or how does that assure that everyone will indeed benefit from that? This every time people use that line, use it, do it for the greater good, of mankind. It is, to me, it is just so ironic that you don't seem to learn a lot from history, because that was the line that we use by pretty much every dictator, by every Machiavellian dictator, tyrant you can never think of. That was the line. Every time they decided to enforce a policy or rule that would take away your rights, or at least rights to choose, especially in the context of mandated medical procedures, that was this kind of silver lining that they used. They would say, it's for the greater good, do it for everyone else. You see, all of this doesn't happen just overnight. The rights of people being taken away by tyrants, by authoritarian dictators, they don't do it overnight. They do it gradually. Bit by bit, they'll take away your rights until there is none. Okay, it's what's critical is that in the process of getting from having rights to none at all, is whether or not you are aware of this happening, and that you continue to resist. Okay, the only thing why it gets to that point of no return is because people didn't resist enough. And I think that says a lot about when you think of all the important and revolutionary acts of revolution that has happened throughout the course of history. The people who started them, the people who brought about change that were absolutely necessary to bring down these evil tyrants, the powerful dictators, okay? It started from a very courageous few, if not just the one person who had the guts and the balls to just stand out, in a crowd full of compliant people. And I'm saying this not to encourage people to be rebellious just for the sake of it, no. But what I'm trying to really get you to do is to start thinking rationally, start connecting the dots, starting to put the two and two together and see what's happening right before your eyes for what it really is. Okay? Even if you want to go back on the argument that, well, it's a little bit too much to compare what's happened in history to what's happening right now, even if that's where you stand on, at least try to see where I'm coming from, with this, that it does take, it's always down to courageous individuals, to people who have the guts to stand out, to say for what it really is. And I think when we can all agree that that is the case, that in times where there is revolution, there is pending revolution, okay, it always comes down to the people who had the balls to stand out, who had the balls and the guts to stand out and face adversity, when they know that the everyone will be coming after them. Even the people who don't necessarily disagree with this person will also have to pretend to come after him or her, just to appease the powers that be. That's pretty much where we are right now. At least have the decency to admit that there is a lot of truth to where people like me are coming from, with our arguments on this. And it really does take some guts and courage, really, to start speaking out. As I told you about my experience having my 20-second viral video, completely kind of blew up and people losing their minds over it. I mostly got insults and attacks. That's the extent of most of the backlash that I got. I rarely did I get an actual coherent and cogent, argument, a really strong argument that really challenged what I said. Because number one, as I said, it wasn't none of it was a factual claim. It was merely a request, really, to start to get people to think about what's happening. Okay, a request to something that was promised to us as voluntary, to keep it that way. Okay, but people lost their minds. I was called all sorts of names. I was threatened, with death threats. They came after me in my DMs. And I think at some point I even got some undercover, there was definitely some sort of psyop, undercover, I guess goon, or they call it cyber troopers coming in, sliding into my DMs, which is never welcome, right? And trying to kind of fish me out, right? And it was just, to say the least, it was uncomfortable. It was something that I really, I wish I will never have to go through again. I will never wish on anyone, but it is something that is necessary. Apparently, in a sea where everyone is just so blinded because they're afraid. Okay, whatever the reason, they're afraid, or they think that what they're seeing that is being presented to them by people at the top is the truth. Okay, that anything apart from that is not true. This is why this is so difficult. Yeah. But as I said, it's necessary. This is something that is absolutely necessary. So this idea of, this road to hell is paved with good intentions, goes all the way back to the Bible. It has a biblical connotation to it. It is literally where that has come from. So I guess you could argue even God, doesn't warrant for this notion of doing something for the greater good. Because, as Madonna said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Not that Madonna said it, but yeah, it was made popular by that song. So this road to hell is paved with good intentions for the greater good. The other kind of easier way to put it, when something is done for the greater good, okay, I guess another way you can answer this question, it's supposed to be rhetorical, but some way to kind of solidify the answer to this, okay, and where you're supposed to stand. Does harming one soul or killing one soul make it okay, make it justifiable in order to save 100 others? I think it's like the simplest way to really put it into practice, right? So if you're really doing it for the greater good, for everyone else, does it mean that if you were to save 100 people, does that make it okay that you kill just one person? And the fact that people are still not able to see what's happening now with that and kind of tie it back to the meaning of that, right? Is it justifiable that we lose people, however insignificant those number of people are? All right. Is it okay that these people fall victim or perish, for the reason of trying to save everyone else, trying to save so-called society, for the betterment of society? I think you have the answer already, right? Now, I wanted to go into more of a philosophical route, of discussion here, but I think we're kind of running out of time because we're heading right into the last 10 minutes of this hour. I was hoping to kind of end it with a discussion on utilitarianism versus Kantianism, which is kind of consequential, like things done out of consequence, good deeds that are done, basically what the greater good argument is based upon, as opposed to the ontological reasoning, which means you're doing something good because it's good. It's the good thing to do. It's based on morality. So on the surface, what I can tell you really, the latter is the better argument to have, is the better persuasion, is the better motivation to have when you want to do something good. Not so much consequential. Although, yes, you could say utilitarianism is a good way of kind of encapsulating the whole liberal, at least the classic liberal movement and ideology. It started from a good place. It really did. Yeah. And even, for the pioneers of utilitarianism, people like Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, these were the pioneers. They were the fathers of utilitarianism. Okay. They really did care about other people's well-being and the welfare of us as a collective, as members of society. But, there comes a point where you have to address the fact that that approach kind of does lead to certain limitations. And the limitations start where it starts to overlap, okay, or overcome the needs of one's own personal preferences or one's own personal welfare. Okay, so yeah, I was planning to kind of delve deeper into that, but we're hugely running over time here as we go into the last into the 56th minute. So I want to try and make it under an hour. So I've only got a few minutes, 4 minutes to go. So just to close out the discussion for today on bodily autonomy, what can we do? Okay, this is kind of more of a rhetorical question and something I want to leave you guys with to think and ponder on. What can we do as sovereign individuals to reclaim our bodily autonomy? And shouldn't we all be pro-choice, or at least be consistent with our arguments when it comes to medical bodily freedom? So if you truly believe in bodily autonomy, if you truly believe that every person, whether you're a man or woman, should have complete control over your sovereign rights, over your self-sovereignty, what you decide to do with your body, whether it's a medical procedure, okay? For women, I guess, because a lot of it comes with the discussion on women's reproductive health for women. When it comes to the rights to having an abortion, or the right to keep a baby, the right not to have to cut your genitals, have genital mutilation, have to undergo genital mutilation for whatever reason, whether it's cultural, religion, and whatnot. If you are truly honest and genuine about that, then you would extend the same principle, you would extend the same argument when it comes to mandates, mandates for medical procedures, namely for the vaccines that we are having now. Okay, so that pretty much sums up the discussion on bodily autonomy in this episode. I will come back with the next and the third episode soon. As I said, it's in the works, and I've already spoken to a number of people who do have very interesting things to share and talk about on my podcast. So until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I look forward to having you guys tune in for my next one. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.